Nothing hurts more than watching your own family laugh at your misfortune. When substitute teacher Gabe Trinidad inherited a falling-apart mansion, that's exactly what happened. His ex-in-laws called it Gabe's money pit. His own siblings wondered how he'd afford to tear it down. The mansion had peeling paint, broken windows, and a demolition notice on the gate. Everyone saw it as another burden Gabe couldn't handle. But when Gabe walked through those dusty halls with his 2 children, he felt something different. The old Victorian house held secrets that would change everything. The railroad tycoon who built it in 1898 had hidden more than anyone imagined. While fixing leaks and patching walls, Gabe and his kids found strange carvings under the wallpaper. These weren't just decorations, they were clues to a mystery that had waited over a century to be solved. But would what the family discovered in those forgotten walls be enough to save them all? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown driveway as Gabe Trinidad stood before the iron gates of Hartwell Manor, a crumpled demolition notice in his weathered hands. At 52, he carried the weight of a man who had spent decades teaching other people's children while struggling to provide for his own. His graying hair caught the light as he studied the mansion that had become both his inheritance and his burden. "Dad, are you sure we should go in there?" Isla's voice carried the cautious curiosity of an 11-year-old who had learned to expect disappointment. She clutched her worn backpack, filled with the notebooks and colored pencils that went everywhere with her. Despite their financial struggles, Isla possessed an optimism that reminded Gabe of his younger self before life had taught him to expect less. Mateo, 16, and armed with the sardonic wit that came from watching his father struggle, kicked at a loose stone in the driveway. "It's not like we have anywhere else to go," he muttered, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity about the towering Victorian structure before them. The teenager had inherited his father's dark eyes and his mother's sharp intelligence, along with a protective instinct that made him seem older than his years. Gabe pushed open the rusted gate, its hinges groaning in protest. The sound echoed across the 3-acre property, disturbing a family of crows that had taken residence in the ancient oak trees lining the approach. "Your great-uncle Harold wasn't much for maintenance," he said, attempting lightness for his children's sake. The mansion loomed before them, a testament to the ambitions of another era. Built in 1898 by railroad tycoon Edmund Hartwell, the 3-story Victorian had once been the crown jewel of the small town of Millbrook. Now, vines strangled the ornate turrets, and several windows on the upper floors were boarded over with weathered plywood. The wraparound porch sagged under the weight of neglect, and paint peeled from the elaborate gingerbread trim like old skin. "It's bigger than I thought it would be," Isla whispered, her voice filled with wonder despite the building's obvious decay. She pulled out her sketchbook and began drawing the mansion's silhouette, capturing both its grandeur and its deterioration with the unconscious skill of a natural artist. Mateo surveyed the property with a teenager's practical pessimism. "How much do you think it'll cost to tear this place down?" he asked, though his question carried more concern than criticism. He had learned early that every decision in their household came down to money they didn't have. Gabe's throat tightened. The demolition notice gave them 90 days to either bring the structure up to code or face municipal demolition. The estimated cost for repairs exceeded his annual salary by a factor of 10. "We'll figure it out," he said, the words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. As they approached the front door, Gabe remembered the family gathering 3 weeks earlier, where Harold Trinidad's will had been read. The lawyer's office had been crowded with relatives, most of whom had ignored Gabe for years. His ex-wife Sarah had attended, seated strategically between her parents, who had never forgiven Gabe for what they called his lack of ambition. His siblings Maria, the successful real estate agent, and Carlos, the insurance executive, had exchanged meaningful glances when the mansion was mentioned. A mansion, Maria had scoffed, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her phone screen. More like a money pit with delusions of grandeur. Carlos had been more direct. You should sell it immediately, Gabe. Cut your losses before this thing bankrupts you. Their father, Roberto Trinidad, had remained silent throughout the reading, but his disappointed expression spoke volumes. At 78, Roberto had spent his retirement years watching his eldest son struggle through a divorce, job instability, and the constant financial pressure of raising 2 children on a substitute teacher's income. Sarah's parents, the Kellys, had been less subtle. "Well," Margaret Kelly had announced loud enough for the entire room to hear, "I suppose every family needs its charity case." The memory stung, but Gabe pushed it aside as he fumbled with the ornate brass key Harold's lawyer had given him. The lock turned with surprising ease, and the heavy oak door swung open to reveal the mansion's interior. The foyer took their breath away. Despite years of neglect, the space retained an undeniable majesty. A grand staircase curved upward, its mahogany banister dulled but intact. Stained glass windows cast colored light across dust motes dancing in the air. The ceiling soared 20 feet overhead, decorated with intricate plasterwork that spoke of craftsmen who had taken pride in their art. "Wow," Isla breathed, her earlier caution forgotten. She wandered toward the staircase, her fingers trailing along the carved newel post. "It's like a castle, Dad." Mateo's cynicism wavered as he took in the mansion's scale. "How many rooms does this place have?" 17, Gabe replied, consulting the property survey, not counting the servants' quarters or the basement. They moved through the ground floor, their footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. The formal dining room featured a massive stone fireplace and built-in china cabinets. The library's walls were lined with empty bookshelves, though a few leather-bound volumes remained scattered on the floor. The kitchen, clearly added during a 1950s renovation, looked like a museum exhibit of mid-century appliances. In what had once been the parlor, Isla discovered a faded family portrait leaning against the wall. The photograph showed a distinguished man in his 40s, a woman in an elegant dress, and 2 children, a boy and a girl posed formally in front of the mansion's front entrance. The image was sepia-toned and cracked with age, but the subjects' faces were still clear. "That must be Edmund Hartwell and his family," Gabe said, taking the portrait from his daughter. "Harold mentioned him in his letters. He built this place after making his fortune in the railroad business." "What happened to them?" Isla asked, studying the faces with the intensity she usually reserved for her art projects. Harold never said much about it, just that the family left town suddenly sometime in the 1930s. The house has been empty ever since, except for Harold living in the caretaker's cottage. Mateo joined them, his interest piqued despite himself. Why would someone just abandon a place like this? "The Great Depression hit a lot of wealthy families hard," Gabe explained. "Maybe they lost their money and couldn't afford to maintain it." As they explored the upper floors, the mansion's problems became more apparent. Water damage had warped the hardwood floors in several bedrooms. The plumbing was ancient, and the electrical system looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1940s. In the master bedroom, a corner of the ceiling had collapsed, exposing rotted beams and water-stained insulation. "Dad," Mateo said quietly, "we can't afford to fix all this." Gabe nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of reality. "I know, son, but maybe we can find a way to make it work, at least temporarily." They spent the afternoon taking inventory of the mansion's condition, creating lists of urgent repairs and dreaming of what the place could become. Isla filled her sketchbook with drawings of the rooms, imagining how they might look restored. Mateo, despite his skepticism, found himself calculating the costs of various repairs, his mathematical mind drawn to the challenge of making the numbers work. As evening approached, they prepared to leave, but Gabe lingered in the foyer, studying the portrait they had found. Something about Edmund Hartwell's expression intrigued him, a look of determination mixed with concern, as if the man had been facing his own impossible challenges. "Dad," Isla's voice broke through his reverie. Are we really going to try to save this place? Gabe looked at his daughter, seeing in her face the same hope and determination that had once driven him to become a teacher despite his family's doubts. We're going to try, sweetheart. I can't promise we'll succeed, but we're going to try. As they walked back to their modest apartment across town, Gabe's phone buzzed with text messages from his siblings. Maria had found a demolition company willing to work cheap. Carlos had researched the property's assessed value and concluded that the land was worth more than the building. Even Sarah had sent a message suggesting they be practical about this situation. But as Gabe tucked his children into bed that night, he found himself thinking not about the mansion's problems, but about its possibilities. For the first time in years, he had something that belonged to him, something that wasn't a hand-me-down or a compromise. The mansion might be falling apart, but it was his to save or lose. That night, as he lay in his narrow bed in their cramped apartment, Gabe Trinidad made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, he would begin the impossible task of bringing Hartwell Manor back to life. He didn't know how, and he couldn't afford to fail, but he was going to try. Because sometimes a man needs something bigger than himself to fight for, even if everyone else thinks he's fighting a losing battle. The faded family portrait sat on his nightstand, Edmund Hartwell's determined expression seeming to watch over him in the darkness. And in that moment, Gabe felt a kinship with the long-dead railroad tycoon, two men, separated by a century, united by their willingness to bet everything on an impossible dream. 3 days later, Gabe arrived at the mansion with a toolbox borrowed from his neighbor and a determination that felt both foolish and necessary. The morning air carried the scent of autumn leaves and the faint promise of rain. Isla and Mateo flanked him as he unlocked the front door, their weekend transformed into an adventure neither had expected. "Where should we start?" Isla asked, her notebook already open to a fresh page where she had sketched a rough floor plan of the mansion's ground floor. "The kitchen," Gabe decided. "If we can get the plumbing working, we'll have a place to clean up and maybe even make some basic repairs." The kitchen sink hadn't worked in years, its faucet corroded and the pipes beneath clogged with debris. As Gabe wrestled with the ancient plumbing, Mateo explored the adjacent pantry, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Dad, there's something weird about this wall," Mateo called out, his voice echoing in the confined space. Gabe looked up from the tangle of pipes. "What do you mean?" "Come look at this." Gabe wiped his hands on his jeans and joined his son in the pantry. Mateo's flashlight illuminated a section of wall that looked different from the rest. The wallpaper was peeling more dramatically here, and the surface beneath seemed uneven. "It's like something's pushing out from behind the wallpaper," Mateo observed, running his fingers along the raised sections. Isla squeezed into the pantry beside them, her curiosity overcoming her caution. "Can we peel it back and see what's underneath?" Gabe hesitated. The wallpaper was already damaged, and they were planning to renovate anyway. "I suppose it can't hurt to look." Working together, they carefully peeled away strips of the faded floral wallpaper. What they found underneath took their breath away. Carved directly into the wooden wall were intricate symbols and patterns, not random scratches, but deliberate designs that formed a complex geometric puzzle. "What is that?" Isla whispered, her artistic eye immediately recognizing the craftsmanship involved. The carvings covered nearly the entire wall, arranged in a series of concentric circles with smaller symbols radiating outward. Some looked like mathematical equations, others resembled compass roses or star charts. In the center, a single word was carved in elegant script: "Begin." "It's like a treasure map," Mateo said, his teenage skepticism battling with genuine excitement. Gabe traced one of the symbols with his finger. The wood was smooth, polished by time and wear. "These aren't random. Someone spent a lot of time creating this." "Edmund Hartwell?" Isla suggested, remembering the portrait they had found. "Maybe. Harold never mentioned anything like this, but then again, he probably never looked behind the wallpaper." They spent the next hour examining the carvings, taking photographs and making sketches. The symbols seemed to follow a pattern, but understanding their meaning was beyond their immediate grasp. Some resembled astronomical symbols, others looked like geometric proofs, and still others appeared to be a form of code. "We need to research this," Gabe said finally. "There might be records at the library or historical society." As they prepared to leave the pantry, Isla noticed something else. "Dad, look at this." She pointed to a small section of carved text at the bottom of the wall, nearly hidden by shadows. Gabe knelt down and read the words aloud. "For those who seek what was lost, the path begins with understanding the past." "That's definitely a clue," Matteo said, his earlier cynicism replaced by genuine curiosity. The drive to the Millbrook Public Library was filled with excited speculation. Isla sat in the back seat, sketching the symbols from memory, while Matteo researched Edmund Hartwell on his phone. "Listen to this," Matteo said, reading from a genealogy website. "Edmund Hartwell was born in 1854, made his fortune in railroad investments, and built the mansion in 1898. He was known for his eccentricity and his passion for puzzles and codes." "Puzzles and codes?" Gabe repeated. "Yeah, it says here that he was a member of several intellectual societies and was known for creating elaborate riddles for his friends. He even published a book about cryptography in 1925. The library's local history section was housed in a quiet corner of the building, overseen by Mrs. Chen, an elderly librarian who had worked there for over 30 years. When Gabe explained what they were looking for, her eyes lit up with interest. "Edmund Hartwell," she mused, pulling several thick volumes from the shelves. "Now, there's a name I haven't heard in a while. He was quite the character, from what I've read." The books contained photographs of the mansion in its prime, society pages from the local newspaper, and business records from Hartwell's various enterprises. But it was a 1929 newspaper article that caught Gabe's attention. "Railroad Baron Vanishes," the headline read. "Local millionaire Edmund Hartwell and family disappear without warning." According to the article, the Hartwell family had left town suddenly in October 1929, just days before the stock market crash that would trigger the Great Depression. Their departure had been so abrupt that they left behind servants, unpaid bills, and a mansion full of furniture. "That's strange," Gabe murmured. "If he left in such a hurry, why would he have time to carve all those symbols?" Mrs. Chen leaned over their shoulders, studying the article. "There were rumors, you know. People said he saw the crash coming and prepared for it. Some thought he had hidden his wealth somewhere before he left." "Hidden his wealth?" Isla asked. "Just local folklore," Mrs. Chen said with a smile. "Every old mansion has stories about buried treasure, but Edmund Hartwell was known for his love of puzzles. If anyone would have created an elaborate treasure hunt, it would have been him." They spent the rest of the afternoon researching, copying relevant documents, and building a picture of Edmund Hartwell as a man who had anticipated economic disaster and taken steps to protect his fortune. The more they learned, the more the carved symbols began to seem like something more than mere decoration. As they drove home, Gabe's phone rang. It was his sister Maria. "Gabe, I've been thinking about that mansion," she said without preamble. "Carlos and I want to help you with the demolition costs. We can't let you ruin yourself over this." "I'm not planning to demolish it," Gabe replied. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't afford to renovate that place. Be practical. I found something today that might change things." "What kind of something?" Gabe glanced at his children, both listening intently. "I'm not sure yet, but I think Uncle Harold's inheritance might be more valuable than we thought." "Gabe, please tell me you're not chasing some fantasy about hidden treasure." "I'm chasing the possibility that there's more to this mansion than meets the eye." Maria sighed. "You're setting yourself up for disappointment, and more importantly, you're setting those kids up for disappointment." After hanging up, Gabe sat in his car outside their apartment building, staring at the photographs they had taken of the carved symbols. Isla and Matteo waited patiently, sensing their father's internal struggle. "Dad," Isla said finally, "are we going to try to solve it?" Gabe looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Mateo's carefully neutral expression. They had so little in their lives that belonged to them alone. The mansion might be falling apart, but it was theirs. And now, perhaps, it held secrets that could change everything. "Yes," he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "We're going to try to solve it." As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, Gabe felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of a mystery waiting to be unraveled. The carved symbols weren't just decorations, they were Edmund Hartwell's gift to the future, a puzzle that had waited nearly a century for the right people to find it. That night, as Gabe tucked his children into bed, Isla asked the question that had been on all their minds. "Dad, what if we actually find something?" Gabe smiled, remembering the determination in Edmund Hartwell's carved words. "Then we'll prove that sometimes the impossible things are just the ones nobody else was brave enough to try." Outside their window, the lights of Millbrook twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere across town, Hartwell Manor waited in the shadows, keeping its secrets for another day. The next Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors to Hartwell Manor. Gabe was teaching Isla how to use a level when the sound of car doors slamming echoed from the driveway. Through the front window, he watched his siblings, Maria and Carlos, emerge from Maria's pristine Mercedes, their expressions mixing curiosity with concern. "Great," Mateo muttered from his position near the carved wall, where he had been photographing the symbols from different angles. "The cavalry's here." "Be nice," Gabe warned, though he felt his own tension rising. He had hoped for more time to make progress before facing family scrutiny. Maria entered the foyer with the confidence of someone accustomed to evaluating properties. Her heels clicked against the worn hardwood as she surveyed the mansion's interior with a practiced eye. Carlos followed, his insurance executive's instincts immediately cataloging potential liability issues. "My God, Gabe," Maria breathed, taking in the mansion's scale. "This place is massive." 17 rooms, Isla announced proudly, appearing at her aunt's elbow. "Plus secret passages." "Secret passages?" Carlos raised an eyebrow. "Isla, this isn't a storybook." "Come see," Isla insisted, leading them toward the pantry where the carved symbols waited. Maria's reaction was immediate and decisive. "Gabe, these are just old decorations, maybe worth something to an antique dealer, but hardly reason to bankrupt yourself renovating this place." "They're not decorations," Mateo said, his voice carrying a defensive edge. "They're a puzzle. We researched Edmund Hartwell. He was famous for creating codes and riddles." Carlos studied the symbols with the skepticism of a man who dealt in facts and figures. "Even if they are some kind of puzzle, what makes you think it leads to anything valuable?" "Because of this," Gabe said, showing them the newspaper article about Hartwell's sudden disappearance. "He left town just before the stock market crash. A man with his resources doesn't just vanish without a plan." "Or maybe he went broke like everyone else and couldn't face the shame," Maria countered. "Gabe, you're chasing a fairy tale." Their discussion was interrupted by another arrival. A sleek black sedan pulled up outside, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. He was tall and lean, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from success in competitive fields. "Mr. Trinidad?" The man extended his hand as he approached the front door. "Vincent Cross, Cross Development Group. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I heard about your inheritance and wanted to make you an offer." Gabe accepted the handshake cautiously. "What kind of offer?" "A generous one. I buy distressed properties, and I'm prepared to pay above market value for this land. Cash, quick closing, no inspections needed." "The house isn't for sale," Gabe said. Vincent's smile never wavered. "I understand you're dealing with a demolition order. That's expensive, not to mention the ongoing costs of maintaining a property this size. I could solve all your problems with one check." Maria stepped forward, her business instincts engaged. "What kind of offer are we talking about?" "200,000 for the property as is," Vincent said smoothly. "That's more than generous considering the condition and the pending demolition order." 200,000, Carlos whistled softly. "Gabe, that's more than you make in 4 years." The property isn't for sale, Gabe repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. Think about your children, Vincent continued, his tone becoming more persuasive. That money could pay for their college education, set them up for success. What can this old house give them, except debt? Isla moved closer to her father, her small hand finding his. Dad, we want to solve the puzzle. Vincent's smile flickered, just for a moment. What puzzle is that? Nothing, Maria said quickly. Kids' imaginations. You know how it is. But Vincent's eyes had sharpened with interest. I've heard the stories about this place. Local legends about hidden treasure. Surely you don't believe. Of course not, Carlos interjected. We're practical people. After Vincent left, promising to keep his offer open, the family stood in uncomfortable silence. The developer's visit had changed the dynamic, making the mansion's problems feel more pressing and the puzzle's promise more distant. Gabe, Maria said gently, $200,000 would change your life. I know. The kids would have security, college funds, a future. I know. Then why won't you consider it? Gabe looked around the foyer at the dusty grandeur that surrounded them. Because this is the first thing I've ever owned that nobody else chose for me. The first thing that's mine to save or lose. You're being selfish, Carlos said bluntly. This isn't just about you. You have responsibilities. I'm thinking about my responsibilities, Gabe replied, his voice gaining strength. I'm thinking about teaching my kids that sometimes you have to fight for what you believe in, even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. The argument might have continued, but Isla's voice cut through the tension. I solved part of it. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood beside the carved wall, her notebook open, comparing her sketches to the symbols. This isn't just one puzzle, she explained, her young voice filled with excitement. It's a series of puzzles. Each symbol is a clue to the next step. And this one, she pointed to a circular pattern near the center of the wall. It's a map of the mansion. A map. Gabe knelt beside his daughter, studying her work. See how the circles match the floor plan? The big circle is the main hall, the smaller ones are the rooms. And these lines, she traced delicate carved lines with her finger. They show hidden passages between the rooms. Mateo joined them, his skepticism replaced by grudging admiration for his sister's observation. She's right. Look, you can see the outline of the staircase here, and the kitchen is marked with this symbol that looks like a hearth. If there are hidden passages, Gabe said slowly, then there might be hidden rooms as well. Maria shook her head. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you can't afford to renovate this place. But what if we find something that makes it worth renovating? Isla asked. Like what? Like whatever Edmund Hartwell was hiding. Carlos checked his watch. I hate to break up this treasure hunt, but I have to get home. Gabe, promise me you'll think about Vincent Cross's offer. I'll think about it. Gabe agreed, though his eyes remained fixed on his daughter's drawings. After his siblings left, Gabe sat on the front porch with his children, watching the sun set over the overgrown grounds. The mansion loomed behind them, its windows dark and secretive. Dad, Mateo said, do you really think we can solve this? I think we can try, Gabe replied. And sometimes trying is enough. Even if we don't find any treasure. Gabe considered the question. Even then, because the real treasure isn't what we might find, it's what we're learning about ourselves while we look for it. As they prepared to leave, Isla made one final discovery. Hidden in a corner of the carved wall, so small it was almost invisible, was a tiny arrow pointing toward the library. Below it, in script so faint it was barely readable, were the words, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." That's our next clue, she announced triumphantly. Gabe smiled, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow, they would explore the library, follow the trail that Edmund Hartwell had left for them. Tonight, though, he would dream of possibilities instead of limitations, of mysteries instead of bills, of a future built on courage rather than compromise. The mansion stood silent in the darkness, keeping its secrets for another day. But change was coming to Hartwell Manor, carried on the hopes and determination of a father who had finally found something worth fighting for. The library at Hartwell Manor had been Edmund Hartwell's sanctuary, and even in its current state of neglect, traces of its former grandeur remained. Built-in bookshelves lined 3 walls from floor to ceiling, their cherry wood dulled by decades of dust, but still bearing the craftsmanship of a bygone era. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its leather top cracked and faded but still imposing. Following Isla's discovery of the arrow pointing toward the library, the family had arrived early Sunday morning with renewed purpose. Gabe carried a toolbox and cleaning supplies, while the children brought notebooks, cameras, and a determination to uncover the next piece of Edmund Hartwell's puzzle. The arrow was pointing this way, Isla said, consulting her sketches as they entered the library. So the next clue should be somewhere in here. The room felt different from the rest of the mansion, more intimate, more personal. Scattered books lay where they had fallen from the shelves, their pages yellowed with age. A globe on a brass stand sat in one corner, its surface showing countries and borders that no longer existed. "Look at this," Matteo called from behind the desk. He had opened the drawers and found them filled with papers, maps, and what appeared to be business correspondence. "There's a ton of stuff here." Gabe joined his son, lifting out stacks of documents. Most were routine business, papers, railroad contracts, investment records, correspondence with banks and partners. But mixed among them were more personal items, family photographs, letters from Edmund's wife, and what appeared to be pages from a personal journal. "Dad, listen to this," Gabe said, reading from a letter dated September 1929. "My dear Catherine, I fear our comfortable world is about to collapse. The signs are everywhere for those who know how to read them. I have made certain preparations, though I pray I am wrong about what is coming." "He saw the crash coming," Isla said, looking up from her exploration of the bookshelves, "just like the newspaper article said." "There's more," Gabe continued reading. "I have created a trail for future generations to follow, should they prove worthy of the treasure I have hidden. The path is not for the lazy or the foolish, but for those who value knowledge and perseverance over mere wealth." Matteo stopped sorting through papers. "He really did hide something, and he wanted it to be found," Isla added, "but only by the right people." As they continued searching, Gabe found himself drawn to a particular section of the bookshelf. Unlike the others, this shelf held books that seemed deliberately arranged not alphabetically or by subject, but in a pattern that suggested intention. The books were all different sizes and colors, but they created a visual rhythm that caught his attention. "Isla, come look at this," he called. His daughter approached, her artist's eye immediately recognizing what he had seen. They're arranged by color and size to create a pattern, like a code. "Can you see what it says?" Isla tilted her head, studying the arrangement. "It's hard to tell with some of the books missing, but I think it spells out words." She pulled out her notebook and began sketching the pattern. "THE something, CHAMBER. "The chamber," Matteo repeated. "What chamber?" Their answer came from an unexpected source. As Gabe reached for one of the books to examine it more closely, it shifted under his touch, revealing that it wasn't a book at all. It was a wooden box designed to look like a book spine. Inside, they found a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Edmund Hartwell's careful handwriting. "This is it," Gabe whispered, his voice filled with awe. "This is his personal journal." The journal was divided into sections, each dealing with different aspects of Edmund's life and work. But the section that captured their attention was titled "The Preservation Project" and dated from the summer of 1929. "I have spent the past months preparing for the inevitable," Edmund had written. "The economic signs are clear to anyone willing to see them. When the collapse comes, it will be swift and merciless. I have therefore taken steps to preserve not just my family's fortune, but the legacy of our achievements." The journal detailed Edmund's creation of what he called the chamber, a hidden room within the mansion where he had stored valuable items, documents, and securities. The room was protected by a series of puzzles and locks, designed to ensure that only someone with patience, intelligence, and genuine need would be able to access it. The first key lies in understanding the foundation of knowledge, Edmund had written. Those who seek merely gold will find only dust. Those who value wisdom will find riches beyond measure. Foundation of knowledge, Isla repeated. What do you think that means? Maybe it's literal, Matteo suggested. Like the foundation of the house? Or maybe it's about the foundation of learning, Gabe said. Edmund was an educated man. He valued knowledge and intellectual achievement. As they pondered the meaning, Isla continued exploring the library. She had developed a talent for noticing details that others missed, and something about the fireplace at the far end of the room caught her attention. "Dad, look at this," she called. The fireplace was magnificent carved stone with elaborate decorations around the mantel. But what Isla had noticed was that some of the decorative elements weren't just ornamental. Hidden among the carved vines and leaves were symbols that matched those they had found in the pantry. "It's another part of the puzzle," she announced excitedly. Gabe and Matteo joined her, and together they studied the fireplace carvings. The symbols were subtly worked into the design, so skillfully integrated that they appeared to be mere decoration unless you knew what to look for. "This one looks like a mathematical equation," Matteo observed, pointing to a series of carved numbers and symbols. "And this one is definitely astronomical," Gabe added, recognizing constellation patterns from his college astronomy class. "But what do they mean?" Isla asked. The answer came from the journal. In a section dated October 1929, just days before the family's disappearance, Edmund had written, "The final preparations are complete. The chamber is sealed and the path is laid. 3 keys I have hidden, the first in the place of nourishment, the second in the place of learning, and the third in the place of rest. Only when all 3 are united will the chamber reveal its secrets." "The first key was in the pantry," Gabe said, his excitement growing. "The place of nourishment. And the second key is here in the library," Matteo added. "The place of learning. Which means the third key is in a bedroom," Isla concluded. "The place of rest." They spent the rest of the afternoon documenting their discoveries, photographing the fireplace carvings, and copying relevant passages from Edmund's journal. The journal revealed a man who had been both pragmatic and idealistic, someone who had seen economic disaster coming and had taken steps to protect not just his wealth, but his family's legacy. "He really cared about the future," Isla observed, reading over her father's shoulder. "He wanted to make sure his treasure would go to people who deserved it." "People like us?" Matteo asked. "People who don't give up," Gabe replied. "People who value working together and learning from the past." As they prepared to leave the mansion, Gabe's phone rang. It was Vincent Cross. "Mr. Trinidad, I hope you've had time to consider my offer," the developer said. "I'm prepared to increase it to 250,000 if you can close within the week." "Why the rush?" Gabe asked. "I have other projects that depend on this acquisition. Time is money, as they say. I need more time to think about it." "Of course. But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." After hanging up, Gabe shared the conversation with his children. Vincent's increased offer and sense of urgency puzzled him. Why would a developer be so interested in a property that needed demolition? "Maybe he knows something we don't," Matteo suggested. "Or maybe he knows something we do," Isla said thoughtfully. "What do you mean?" "Maybe he's heard about the treasure too. Maybe that's why he wants to buy the house so badly." The thought sent a chill through Gabe. If Vincent Cross knew about Edmund Hartwell's hidden chamber, they might be in a race against time. The demolition order gave them 90 days, but if Vincent was working to acquire the property for his own purposes, they might have even less time than that. "We need to solve this faster," Gabe said, looking at his children with new determination. "Tomorrow, we start looking for the third key." As they drove home through the gathering dusk, Hartwell Manor stood silhouetted against the evening sky, its windows dark and mysterious. Somewhere within its walls, Edmund Hartwell's chamber waited, holding secrets that could change their lives forever. The question was whether they would find it before others discovered what they were looking for. The master bedroom at Hartwell Manor occupied the entire east wing of the second floor, its tall windows offering a view of the overgrown gardens and the town beyond. Despite the water damage and decades of neglect, the room retained an air of elegance that spoke of its former occupants' refined taste. Gabe stood in the doorway with his children, Edmund Hartwell's journal in his hands, searching for clues about the third key's location. The journal had been cryptic about the place of rest, mentioning only that it held the final piece of the puzzle that unlocks all others. "It's huge," Isla breathed, stepping into the room. Dust motes danced in the morning sunlight, streaming through the tall windows, and her footsteps echoed on the warped hardwood floor. "Where do we even start looking?" Matteo asked, surveying the room's contents. A massive four-poster bed dominated the center, its dark wood frame still solid despite the years. A fireplace similar to the one in the library occupied one wall, while built-in wardrobes lined another. "The same way we found the others," Gabe replied. "We look for something that doesn't belong, something that was added after the room was built." They began their search systematically, checking the fireplace first, since it had yielded clues in the library. The carved mantelpiece was elaborate, but seemed to contain only decorative elements. The wardrobes were empty, except for a few moth-eaten garments that crumbled at their touch. It was Isla who made the breakthrough. She had been studying the bed frame, running her hands along its carved posts, when she noticed something unusual about the headboard. "Dad, come look at this," she called. The headboard was covered in intricate carvings, vines, flowers, and geometric patterns that seemed purely decorative. But when Isla traced her fingers along one particular section, she found that it moved slightly under pressure. "It's loose," she announced. Gabe joined her, pressing on the section she had discovered. With a soft click, a small panel in the headboard slid aside, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, they found a small metal object wrapped in oiled cloth. "What is it?" Matteo asked, leaning closer. Gabe unwrapped the object carefully. It was a fragment of metal, triangular in shape, with symbols etched into its surface. But it was clearly incomplete. The edges were rough, as if it had been broken away from something larger. "It's part of something bigger," he said, turning the fragment over in his hands. "Look, you can see where it would connect to other pieces." "Like a puzzle piece," Isla observed. "Exactly. This must be the third key Edmund wrote about, but it's only part of it." They compared the fragment to the sketches they had made of the symbols in the pantry and library. The connection was clear. All three locations contained pieces of the same larger puzzle. "We need to go back to the other rooms," Matteo said. "If this is part of a bigger key, the other parts must be hidden there too." Their return to the pantry proved his theory correct. Hidden behind a loose board in the wall, they found another metal fragment. This one was larger, with a straight edge that would clearly connect to the piece from the bedroom. "Two down, one to go," Gabe said, his excitement growing. The library's fragment was the most difficult to locate. They searched for over an hour before Isla discovered it hidden inside the hollow leg of a small table near the window. When they brought all three pieces together, they formed a complete triangular key, its surface covered with symbols that matched those carved into the walls. "It's beautiful," Isla said, running her fingers over the smooth metal. "But what does it open?" "The chamber," Gabe replied, consulting Edmund's journal. "According to this, the key opens the entrance to where he hid his legacy for future generations." "But where is the entrance?" Matteo asked. The journal's next entry provided the answer. "The chamber lies beneath the foundation of knowledge, accessible only to those who understand that true wealth is built on solid ground." "Beneath the foundation of knowledge," Isla repeated. "The library." "The basement under the library," Gabe corrected. Edmund was being literal and metaphorical at the same time. They made their way to the mansion's basement, a space they had avoided during their previous visits. The stone steps were slick with moisture, and the air smelled of dampness and age. Gabe's flashlight beam revealed a maze of storage rooms, wine cellars, and mechanical spaces that extended far beneath the mansion's footprint. "This place is like a labyrinth," Matteo observed, his voice echoing in the confined space. Edmund designed it that way, Gabe said, reading from the journal. He wanted to make sure that only someone truly dedicated would find the chamber. They searched for over an hour, checking walls, floors, and ceiling for any sign of a hidden entrance. The basement seemed to hold nothing but spiders, dust, and the accumulated debris of decades. It was the key itself that finally revealed the secret. As they stood in the room directly beneath the library, Isla noticed that the metal key had begun to vibrate slightly in her hand. "Dad, it's moving," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Gabe took the key, feeling the subtle vibration for himself. As he moved around the room, the vibration grew stronger near one particular wall. "It's some kind of magnetic resonance," he said, his teacher's mind working through the possibilities. Edmund must have embedded metal in the wall behind the entrance. They found the hidden mechanism exactly where the key's vibration was strongest. A small slot in the stone wall, cunningly disguised as a natural crack, accepted the triangular key perfectly. When Gabe turned it, they heard the sound of ancient gears turning within the wall. Slowly, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. "We did it," Matteo breathed, his teenage cynicism completely forgotten. "We found Edmund's chamber," Isla added, her voice filled with awe. The passage was narrow and low, forcing them to walk single file. Gabe led the way, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness ahead. The walls were lined with the same careful stonework as the basement, but these stones bore carved symbols, similar to those they had found throughout the mansion. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 50 feet, the passage opened into a circular chamber. Gabe's flashlight beam swept across the space, revealing something that took their breath away. The chamber was filled with wooden crates, metal filing cabinets, and glass display cases. But what caught their attention immediately was a collection of framed documents hanging on the wall: certificates, bonds, and what appeared to be stock certificates from companies they recognized. "Are those real?" Matteo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gabe approached one of the display cases, his flashlight illuminating a collection of documents that made his hands tremble. Stock certificates from companies that had survived the Great Depression and grown into modern giants. Railroad bonds that had matured decades ago. Investment documents that represented fortunes, preserved through one man's foresight. "Dad," Isla whispered, "how much do you think all this is worth?" Before Gabe could answer, they heard a sound that chilled them to the bone: footsteps echoing from the passage behind them. Someone else was in the basement, and they were coming toward the chamber. "Quick," Gabe whispered, "turn off the lights." They huddled in the darkness, listening as the footsteps grew closer. A beam of light appeared in the passage, and they heard a voice that made Gabe's blood run cold. "I know you're in there, Mr. Trinidad," Vincent Cross called out. "We need to talk." Vincent Cross stepped into the chamber, his expensive suit incongruous in the underground space. His flashlight beam swept across the treasure-filled room before settling on Gabe and his children, who stood protectively in front of the display cases. "Quite a discovery," Vincent said, his voice carrying none of the friendly charm he had displayed during his previous visits. Edmund Hartwell was more clever than anyone gave him credit for. "How did you know about this?" Gabe demanded, instinctively moving closer to his children. "The same way you did, eventually. Research, patience, and a healthy respect for the old man's intelligence." Vincent's smile was cold. "Though I must admit, I didn't expect a substitute teacher to solve the puzzles as quickly as you have." "You've been watching us," Isla said, her young voice filled with indignation. "Monitoring your progress, yes. It seemed more efficient than solving the riddles myself when you were doing such excellent work." Vincent stepped further into the chamber, his flashlight beam revealing more of the treasure around them. "But now that you've found the chamber, our partnership has reached its natural conclusion." "Partnership?" Matteo's voice cracked with adolescent anger. "We're not partners. This is our inheritance. Legally, perhaps, but practically speaking, you're children playing with toys you don't understand." Vincent pulled out his phone, its screen casting blue light across his face. "Do you have any idea what you've actually found here?" Gabe remained silent, but his mind was racing. The stock certificates they had glimpsed, the bonds, the other documents, if they were authentic, they could be worth millions. But Vincent's presence here meant others knew about the treasure, and their family's claim might not be as secure as they had believed. "These aren't just old papers," Vincent continued, approaching one of the display cases. Edmund Hartwell was a visionary. When he saw the crash coming, he didn't just hide his money, he invested it in companies he believed would survive and thrive. Railroad bonds that are now worth 50 times their original value. Stocks in companies that became industry leaders. Government securities that have been compounding interest for nearly a century. "How much?" Gabe asked quietly. "Conservative estimate, $200 million, maybe more, depending on the condition of the documents and the current market valuations." The number hit Gabe like a physical blow. $200 million, enough to change not just his family's life, but the lives of everyone they knew. Enough to save the mansion, restore it to its former glory, and secure his children's future in ways he had never dared imagine. "Of course," Vincent continued, realizing that value requires expertise, connections, and resources that, frankly, Mr. Trinidad, you don't possess. The authentication process alone will take months. The legal work to establish clear ownership will take years, and that's assuming no one challenges your claim. "Who would challenge it?" Gabe asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Edmund Hartwell had other relatives, business partners who might claim they were owed money. The state government, which might argue that abandoned property reverts to public ownership after a certain period. Vincent's smile widened. "It could get very expensive, very quickly. But we have the inheritance documents," Isla said defiantly. "Uncle Harold left the house to Dad." "Uncle Harold left him a house," Vincent corrected. "There's nothing in those documents about hidden treasure. A good lawyer could argue that the treasure was never legally part of the estate." Gabe felt the weight of Vincent's words. The developer was right. They had found the treasure, but claiming it legally might prove more difficult than solving Edmund's puzzles. And fighting a legal battle would require resources they didn't have. "However," Vincent continued, "I'm prepared to make this simple for everyone. I'll buy your claim to the property and everything in it for $5 million, cash. No legal battles, no authentication delays, no risk." "$5 million, Matteo repeated. "It's a generous offer, considering the alternatives. You walk away wealthy. I handle the complications. Everyone wins." Gabe looked around the chamber, taking in the magnitude of what they had discovered. $5 million was more money than he had ever imagined having. It would solve every problem they faced, provide security for his children, and allow him to live comfortably for the rest of his life. But something about Vincent's offer felt wrong. The developer was too eager, too prepared with legal arguments and counteroffers. He had known about the treasure before they found it, which meant he had been researching it for some time. If he was willing to pay $5 million without authentication, the treasure was probably worth significantly more. "We need time to think about it," Gabe said finally. "Of course, but don't take too long. Word has a way of getting out about discoveries like this, and the longer you wait, the more complicated things become." Vincent turned to leave, then paused at the chamber entrance. "Oh, and Mr. Trinidad, I'd be very careful about who you tell about this discovery. There are people who would do almost anything for this kind of money." After Vincent left, the family stood in stunned silence. The treasure chamber, which had seemed like a magical discovery just minutes before, now felt like a burden fraught with danger and complexity. "Dad," Isla said quietly, "I don't trust him." "Neither do I," Gabe replied. "But he's right about one thing. This is more complicated than we thought." They spent the next hour exploring the chamber more thoroughly, documenting what they found with photographs and notes. The treasure was even more extensive than Vincent had indicated. In addition to the stocks and bonds, they found rare coins, jewelry, and historical artifacts that would be valuable to museums and collectors. But mixed among the treasure were personal items that revealed the human side of Edmund Hartwell's story. Family photographs, letters from his children, and a diary that chronicled his final days in the mansion. The last entry, dated just 2 days before the family's disappearance, was particularly poignant. "I have done all I can to preserve our legacy," Edmund had written. "The chamber is complete, the clues are in place, and the treasure is secure. If my fears prove correct and we must leave quickly, I pray that someday someone worthy will find what we have hidden. May they use it wisely, and may they remember that true wealth lies not in gold or silver, but in the bonds of family and the courage to face an uncertain future." "He sounds like you, Dad," Isla said, reading over his shoulder. "What do you mean?" "He cared more about his family than about the money, just like you do." Gabe felt tears prick his eyes. Edmund Hartwell had been facing the same impossible choices that confronted him now: how to protect his family, how to preserve their future, how to make decisions that would echo through generations. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Gabe made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the treasure's value and the complications it represented, he felt a strange sense of peace. Edmund Hartwell had left them more than money. He had left them a test of character, a challenge to prove themselves worthy of the gift they had received. "We're not selling to Vincent Cross," he announced. "But Dad," Mateo protested, $5 million is less than we deserve and more than we need." Gabe interrupted. Edmund Hartwell didn't hide this treasure for someone to sell it to the highest bidder. He hid it for someone who would use it to build something better. "What are we going to do?" Isla asked. Gabe looked around the chamber one last time, taking in the magnitude of what they had inherited. "We're going to find out what this treasure is really worth, and then we're going to decide how to use it to honor Edmund's legacy and secure our family's future." As they climbed back up to the mansion's main floor, Gabe felt a weight settling on his shoulders, not the burden of poverty that had pressed down on him for so long, but the responsibility of wealth and the choices that came with it. Behind them, the chamber waited in darkness, holding secrets that could change their lives forever. The question was whether they would have the strength and wisdom to handle what they had found. The revelation came 3 days later, delivered by an unexpected visitor who would change everything they thought they knew about their discovery. Margaret Chen, the elderly librarian who had helped them research Edmund Hartwell, arrived at the mansion carrying a manila envelope thick with documents. "I've been thinking about your treasure hunt," she said, settling into a chair in the mansion's parlor. "Something about Vincent Cross's interest in this property bothered me, so I did some additional research." Gabe poured tea from a thermos while his children gathered around Mrs. Chen, their faces eager with curiosity. They had spent the previous days cataloging the chamber's contents and researching the legal implications of their discovery, but progress had been slow and frustrating. "What did you find?" Isla asked. Mrs. Chen opened her envelope and spread several documents across the coffee table. "I found out who Vincent Cross really is and why he's so interested in this mansion." The first document was a genealogy chart, its branches and connections traced in careful detail. At the top was a name that made Gabe's blood run cold: Edmund Hartwell. Below it, connected by a series of marriages and births, was another name: Vincent Cross. "He's Edmund's great-great-nephew," Mrs. Chen explained. "His great-great-grandmother was Edmund's sister, Margaret Hartwell Cross." "So he's related to Edmund?" Mateo asked. "More than that," Mrs. Chen continued, pulling out another document. "According to this 1,925 will I found in the county archives, Edmund Hartwell left specific instructions about what should happen to his estate if he died without direct heirs." Gabe leaned forward, his heart racing. "What kind of instructions?" "The will states that if Edmund died childless, or if his direct descendants could not be located, the estate would pass to his sister Margaret's line. But there's a catch. The inheritance would only be valid if the heirs could prove they were worthy of the Hartwell legacy." "What does that mean?" Isla asked. Mrs. Chen smiled, clearly enjoying the dramatic moment. "It means they had to solve Edmund's puzzle and find the hidden treasure, just like you did." The implications hit Gabe like a physical blow. Vincent Cross wasn't just some opportunistic developer. He was a legitimate heir to Edmund's fortune, someone who had as much right to the treasure as they did. Maybe more. But wait, Matteo said, his quick mind working through the legal complexities. If Vincent is the rightful heir, why didn't he just claim the property through the courts? Because he couldn't solve the puzzle, Mrs. Chen replied. I found records showing that the Cross family has been aware of their connection to Edmund Hartwell for decades. They've made several attempts to search the mansion over the years, but they never found the chamber. So he needed us to find it for him, Gabe said, the pieces falling into place. Exactly. He's been watching and waiting, probably hoping someone would eventually solve Edmund's riddles. When you inherited the property and started making progress, he saw his opportunity. But the inheritance documents, Isla protested. Uncle Harold left the house to Dad. Harold inherited the property from his uncle, who bought it from the bank after Edmund's disappearance. Mrs. Chen explained. But the legal ownership of the house and the legal ownership of Edmund's hidden treasure are two different things. Gabe felt the walls closing in around him. They had found the treasure, solved the puzzle, and proven themselves worthy of Edmund's legacy. But if Vincent Cross was the rightful heir, their discovery might not matter. There's more, Mrs. Chen continued, pulling out a thick folder. I found Edmund's original building plans for the mansion. Not the ones filed with the city, but his personal architectural drawings. She spread the plans across the table, and Gabe immediately saw what had captured her attention. The mansion's layout was far more complex than they had realized. Hidden passages connected every room, secret chambers existed throughout the structure, and the basement extended far beyond what they had explored. The entire mansion is a puzzle, Mrs. Chen explained. Every room, every corridor, every architectural detail was designed to hide and protect the treasure. It's not just a house, it's a giant puzzle box. Like a mechanical puzzle, Isla said, her artistic mind grasping the concept immediately. Exactly. And according to these plans, the chamber you found is just the beginning. There are multiple treasure rooms, each one more difficult to access than the last. Matteo studied the plans, his mathematical mind analyzing the complex geometry. So the chamber we found is what Edmund called the first vault, Mrs. Chen finished. There are at least 3 more, each one containing different types of treasure. How much are we talking about? Gabe asked. Based on these inventory lists I found, the total value could be closer to $500 million. The number was so large it seemed meaningless. Gabe had grown up in a world where $1,000 was a significant sum, where $50,000 would solve most problems. $500 million was beyond his ability to comprehend. But here's the crucial part, Mrs. Chen continued, pulling out one final document. Edmund's will contains a specific clause about the treasure. It states that ownership goes to whoever can complete the entire puzzle and not just find the first chamber, but access all the hidden vaults. So finding the first chamber doesn't mean we own the treasure? Gabe asked. It means you're in the running. But according to Edmund's instructions, the treasure belongs to whoever can prove they understand the true nature of wealth by completing his final challenge. What's the final challenge? Isla asked. Mrs. Chen smiled. That's what we need to figure out. But I suspect it's not just about solving puzzles, it's about proving you'll use the treasure wisely. As they absorbed this information, Gabe's phone rang. It was Vincent Cross, and his voice carried a new urgency. Mr. Trinidad, I hope you've had time to consider my offer. I'm prepared to increase it to $10 million, but I need an answer today. Why the rush? Gabe asked. Because I've learned that my legal claim to the property is stronger than I initially indicated. I was trying to be generous, but if you force me to go through the courts, you'll end up with nothing. Gabe looked at his children, then at Mrs. Chen, who was shaking her head emphatically. I need more time to think about it. I'm afraid time is something we don't have. I'm filing a claim with the probate court tomorrow morning. After that, the property will be tied up in legal proceedings for years. After hanging up, Gabe sat in stunned silence. They had gone from thinking they owned a magnificent treasure to realizing they might lose it all to a legal challenge they couldn't afford to fight. "What do we do now?" Matteo asked. "We finish what we started," Gabe said, surprising himself with his determination. "If Edmund designed this as a test, then we need to complete it, all of it." "But Vincent has a legal claim," Isla pointed out. "Legal claims can be disputed," Mrs. Chen said. "But if you can prove you've completed Edmund's full challenge, you'll have a much stronger position. According to his will, the treasure goes to whoever proves they're truly worthy of it." "And how do we prove that?" Gabe asked. Mrs. Chen smiled, pulling out the architectural plans again. "We solve the rest of the puzzle, and we do it before Vincent Cross figures out what we're really looking for." As they studied the plans, Gabe felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over him. They had come too far to give up now. Edmund Hartwell had created his treasure hunt for someone exactly like them, someone who would value the journey as much as the destination, someone who would use the treasure to build something better rather than simply hoard it. The mansion around them suddenly felt different, not just a building, but a living puzzle waiting to be solved. And somewhere in its hidden chambers and secret passages lay the key to their future. "Where do we start?" Isla asked, her young voice filled with determination. Gabe looked at his children, seeing in their faces the same courage and intelligence that had brought them this far. "We start by remembering what Edmund wrote in his journal. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in the courage to face an uncertain future and the wisdom to use what we've been given to help others." "You really think we can beat Vincent Cross?" Matteo asked. "I think we can prove we're worthy of Edmund's legacy," Gabe replied, "and sometimes that's enough." Outside, storm clouds were gathering over Millbrook, and the mansion's windows reflected the darkening sky. But inside, the Trinidad family was preparing for the challenge of their Livsa race against time and money and legal complications to claim a treasure that was worth more than any of them had ever dared imagine. The real test was just beginning. The master key revealed itself not as a single object, but as a concept that had been woven throughout Edmund Hartwell's entire design. As dawn broke over Millbrook, the Trinidad family stood in the mansion's main hall, surrounded by the architectural plans, photographs, and notes that represented weeks of intensive investigation. "It's not about finding another physical key," Gabe said, his voice hoarse from the all-night strategy session. "It's about understanding the pattern that connects all the puzzles." They had 48 hours. Vincent Cross had made good on his threat to file legal papers, and his attorneys had obtained a temporary restraining order, preventing the family from removing anything from the property. But the order didn't prevent them from exploring, and Mrs. Chen had found a loophole in the legal language that gave them 2 more days to complete their investigation. "The pattern is everywhere," Isla said, her sketchbook filled with drawings that revealed the mathematical relationships between the mansion's decorative elements. "Every room has the same basic structure puzzle that leads to a clue that leads to a key, and a key that opens the next level. But the final level is different," Matteo added, consulting the architectural plans. "According to these drawings, the master vault isn't accessed through a physical key at all. It's opened by demonstrating understanding of what Edmund called the true equation of wealth." Mrs. Chen, who had barely slept during their research marathon, looked up from a stack of historical documents. "I found something that might explain what he meant by that." She held up a letter dated 1928, written in Edmund's careful handwriting. It's addressed to his business partner, explaining his investment philosophy. She read aloud, "Wealth is not the accumulation of money, but the multiplication of human potential. Every dollar invested should create opportunities for others to succeed. The true measure of a fortune is not what it can buy, but what it can build." He was talking about using money to help people, Isla said. "More than that," Gabe replied, his teacher's mind working through the implications. He was talking about creating lasting change, building something that would continue to grow and help others long after he was gone. That's why he hid the treasure, Matteo realized. He wasn't just protecting it from the stock market crash, he was waiting for someone who would use it the right way. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the front windows, they could see Vincent Cross arriving with a small army of assistants, security guards, and what appeared to be a film crew. "What's he doing?" Isla asked. "Probably documenting everything for his legal case," Gabe said grimly. "Or making sure we don't find anything else before his claim is processed." Vincent approached the front door with his usual confident stride, but something about his demeanor was different. He seemed more aggressive, more desperate than before. "Mr. Trinidad," he called through the door. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." Gabe opened the door, keeping his children behind him. "What do you want, Vincent?" "I want to make one final offer. $20 million. Cash, for your claim to the property and everything in it. You have 1 hour to decide." "Why the sudden generosity?" Gabe asked. Vincent's smile was tight. "Because I've run out of patience. My legal team is confident we'll win in court, but litigation takes time. I prefer to resolve things quickly. And if we say no, then you'll be fighting not just me, but the state of Connecticut, which has filed its own claim, arguing that the treasure represents abandoned property that should revert to public ownership." Gabe felt his heart sink. The state's involvement changed everything. Fighting Vincent Cross would have been difficult enough, but battling the government was virtually impossible for a family with their limited resources. "You have 1 hour," Vincent repeated, then turned and walked back to his waiting vehicles. "Dad, what are we going to do?" Isla asked, her voice small and frightened. "We're going to finish what we started," Gabe said, his voice gaining strength. "We're going to solve Edmund's final puzzle." "But how?" Matteo asked. "We don't even know where the master vault is." "Yes, we do," Gabe replied, studying the architectural plans with new understanding. "It's not hidden in the mansion at all. It's hidden in plain sight." He led them outside, walking around the mansion's perimeter, while Vincent's team watched from a distance. The building's exterior was as elaborate as its interior, with decorative elements that seemed purely ornamental but now revealed themselves as part of Edmund's grand design. "The entire mansion is the master key," Gabe explained. "Every architectural detail, every decorative element, every room and corridor, they're all part of one massive puzzle." "But how do we solve it?" Isla asked. "By understanding what Edmund was really trying to teach us," Gabe said. "Remember what he wrote about the true equation of wealth. He wasn't just talking about money, he was talking about legacy, about building something that would last." They returned to the mansion's interior, where Mrs. Chen was waiting with a discovery that would change everything. "I found Edmund's final journal," she announced, holding up a leather-bound book that had been hidden inside a secret compartment in the main hall's central pillar. "It contains his complete instructions for the final challenge." The journal's last entry was dated the day before the Hartwell family's disappearance, and it revealed the true nature of Edmund's treasure hunt. "The final test is not about finding the master vault, but about proving worthy of its contents. The treasure belongs to whoever can demonstrate that they understand the true purpose of wealth, to create opportunity, to build community, and to leave the world better than they found it. The master vault will reveal itself to those who can answer a single question: what will you do with this treasure that will matter 100 years from now?" "It's not about solving puzzles," Gabe said, understanding flooding through him. "It's about proving we'll use the treasure responsibly." "But how do we prove that?" Matteo asked. "By showing Edmund's spirit what we plan to do with his legacy," Isla said, her artistic intuition grasping the concept immediately. They spent the remaining time before Vincent's deadline, not searching for hidden chambers or decoding cryptic symbols, but planning. They outlined their vision for using the treasure to restore the mansion as a museum and educational center, to establish scholarships for local students, and to create a foundation that would support small businesses and community projects throughout the region. "It's about more than just our family," Gabe said as they worked. "It's about using Edmund's gift to build something that will help others long after we're gone." As the hour approached, they made their final preparations. Vincent's team had grown larger, with news vans and curious onlookers gathering outside the mansion. The story of the treasure hunt had leaked to the media, and the pressure was mounting. 5 minutes, Vincent called through the door. "Are you ready?" Gabe asked his children. "Ready for what?" Matteo asked. "To prove we're worthy of Edmund's trust." They gathered in the main hall, standing beneath the elaborate chandelier that had presided over the mansion for more than a century. Following Edmund's instructions, they spoke aloud, their plans for the treasure, their commitment to using it wisely, and their promise to honor his legacy. As they finished their declaration, something extraordinary happened. The chandelier began to move, its crystal prisms catching the light and casting rainbow patterns across the walls. Hidden mechanisms that had waited nearly a century activated, and the floor beneath their feet began to shift and change. "The master vault," Isla breathed. The main hall's floor had become a complex mechanism, its wooden panels sliding apart to reveal a spiral staircase that descended into a chamber far grander than anything they had imagined. The walls were lined with documents, artifacts, and treasures that represented not just Edmund's wealth, but the collected wisdom and resources of a man who had dedicated his life to building something lasting. "We did it," Matteo said, his voice filled with awe. "No," Gabe corrected, looking at his children with pride. "We proved we deserved the chance to try." Outside, Vincent's deadline had arrived, and his patience had run out. The sound of his approaching footsteps echoed through the mansion as he prepared to claim what he believed was rightfully his. But the Trinidad family had found something more valuable than money. They had found their purpose. And sometimes, that's the greatest treasure of all. The hidden vault door stood open before them, its brass surface gleaming despite nearly a century of concealment. The circular entrance was set into the mansion's foundation, accessed through a mechanism so ingenious that its very existence challenged everything they thought they knew about 19th century engineering. "This is impossible," Matteo whispered, running his fingers along the door's edge. The technology to build something like this didn't exist in Edmund's time. Edmund Hartwell was more than just a businessman, Mrs. Chen said, consulting her historical documents. He was an inventor, an engineer, and a visionary. He held patents for railroad safety devices, mining equipment, and mechanical calculators that were decades ahead of their time. The vault door itself was a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Its surface was covered with intricate engravings that told the story of Edmund's life and philosophy. At the center, a single inscription read, "For those who understand that true wealth lies in service to others." "Dad, look at this," Isla called from inside the vault. Her voice echoed strangely in the circular chamber, which was larger than anything they had imagined. The walls were lined with steel filing cabinets, each one labeled with dates and categories. Display cases held artifacts that gleamed in the light of their flashlights. "It's like a museum," Gabe breathed, stepping into the chamber. "Everything is perfectly preserved." The vault's contents were staggering: stock certificates from companies that had grown into modern giants, government bonds that had been accumulating interest for nearly a century, rare coins and precious metals that represented a fortune in themselves. But scattered among the financial instruments were personal items that revealed the human side of Edmund's legacy. "Look at this," Matteo said, opening a leather portfolio. "It's a letter addressed to the worthy finder of this treasure." Gabe took the letter, his hands trembling as he read Edmund's final message aloud. "If you are reading this, then you have proven yourself worthy of the responsibility I am placing in your hands. The treasure you have found is not merely wealth, it is opportunity. Use it wisely, and it will grow beyond your wildest dreams. Use it selfishly, and it will become a burden that will destroy you and your family. I have spent my life building something that I hope will outlast me. Now that responsibility passes to you. The choice is yours. Will you be a steward of this legacy, or merely its temporary custodian?" "There's more," Matteo said, continuing to read. "He's left specific instructions for how the treasure should be handled, including the names of trustees and lawyers who can help with the legal complications. Above them, They could hear Vincent Cross's voice growing more agitated as he realized something significant was happening. His footsteps echoed through the mansion as he searched for the source of the mechanical sounds that had accompanied the vault's opening. "We need to document everything," Gabe said, his mind racing. "If Vincent finds us here, we need proof that we followed Edmund's instructions correctly." They worked quickly, photographing the vault's contents and copying crucial documents. The treasure was even more extensive than they had imagined, not just stocks and bonds, but real estate deeds, patents, and business agreements that represented ownership stakes in companies across the country. "Dad," Isla said quietly, "this is scary. This much money. It changes everything." "It changes everything only if we let it," Gabe replied. "Edmund left us instructions for a reason. We need to follow them." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and Vincent's voice carried clearly through the mansion's halls. "I know you're here, Trinidad. Whatever you found, it belongs to me by right of inheritance." "Should we close the vault?" Mateo asked. "No," Gabe said firmly. "We have nothing to hide. We solved Edmund's puzzle fairly, and we're prepared to accept the responsibility he's giving us." Vincent's silhouette appeared at the vault entrance, his expensive suit contrasting sharply with the ancient stonework. His eyes widened as he took in the treasure chamber's contents, his calculated composure finally cracking. "My God," he breathed, "it's all here, everything the family legends talked about." "You're too late," Gabe said, stepping protectively in front of his children. "We completed Edmund's challenge. The treasure is ours." "You completed the puzzle," Vincent corrected, his voice hardening. "But that doesn't make you the legal owner. I have a court order that gives me authority over this property and everything in it." "Your court order applies to the house," Mrs. Chen said, emerging from the shadows with a document in her hand. "But according to Edmund's will, the treasure belongs to whoever proves themselves worthy of it. That's a separate legal matter entirely." Vincent's face flushed with anger. "You're making a mistake, all of you. This treasure is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't just walk away with it because you solved some old puzzles." "We're not walking away with it," Gabe said calmly. "We're accepting responsibility for it. There's a difference." "You're a substitute teacher," Vincent spat. "You have no idea how to handle this kind of wealth. You'll lose it all within a year." "Maybe," Gabe acknowledged. "But that's our choice to make. Edmund trusted us with his legacy. We're going to honor that trust." Vincent's composure finally shattered completely. "I won't let you steal what belongs to my family." "Then you'll have to prove you're worthy of it," Gabe replied, "just like we did." The confrontation was about to escalate when the sound of sirens filled the air. Someone had called the police, and the situation was about to become much more complicated. Hartwell's final letter lay open on the vault's central table, its aged paper seeming to glow in the chamber's artificial light. The letter had been Edmund's ultimate gift, not just instructions for the treasure's use, but a complete legal framework that would protect whoever found it from exactly the kind of challenge Vincent Cross was mounting. "Listen to this," Mrs. Chen said, her voice cutting through the tension as police sirens grew louder outside. She held up a document that had been sealed with the letter. "It's a legal trust established in 1929, with provisions that automatically activate when the treasure is discovered by someone who completes the full challenge." "What does that mean?" Isla asked, her young voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "It means Edmund anticipated this exact situation," Mrs. Chen explained. "The trust supersedes all other claims to the treasure. Whoever opens the master vault according to his instructions becomes the legal trustee, with full authority to manage and distribute the assets." Vincent's face went pale. "That's impossible. My lawyers would have found any existing trust documents." "Not if they were sealed and held by a law firm that's been waiting nearly a century to execute them," Mrs. Chen replied, pulling out business cards and legal documents. Edmund used 3 different law firms in 3 different states to ensure his instructions would be carried out exactly as he intended. The sound of footsteps echoed through the mansion as police officers entered the building. Gabe could hear their voices calling out, searching for the source of the disturbance that had been reported by Vincent's security team. "We need to get out of here," Matteo said, looking nervously toward the vault entrance. "No," Gabe said firmly. "We have nothing to hide. We solved Edmund's puzzle fairly, and we're prepared to face whatever comes next." "You're making a mistake," Vincent said, his voice desperate now. "The media attention alone will destroy your family. This kind of wealth attracts attention you can't imagine. People will come after you. Your children will be targets. Your entire life will change." "Our life was already changing," Gabe replied. "The question is whether we'll change it for the better or let fear control our decisions." The police officers found them a few minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the vault's shadows. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with sergeant's stripes, looked around the chamber with obvious amazement. "Well," he said slowly, "I've been a cop for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Someone want to explain what's going on here?" Vincent stepped forward, his businessman's instincts taking over. "Officer, these people are trespassing on property that's under legal dispute. They've broken into a sealed vault and are attempting to steal valuable artifacts." "That's not true," Gabe said calmly. "This is my inherited property, and we discovered this vault through legitimate research. We have documentation to prove everything we've done." "Documentation?" the sergeant asked. Mrs. Chen stepped forward with her folder of legal papers. "I'm Margaret Chen, head librarian at Millbrook Public Library. I've been helping this family research the legal history of this property. Everything they've done is completely legal." "Legal or not," Vincent interrupted, "the property is under a court order that prevents removal of any items until the ownership dispute is resolved." "The court order applies to the house," Mrs. Chen corrected. "But according to these trust documents, the treasure has a separate legal status. It belongs to whoever successfully completes Edmund Hartwell's challenge." The sergeant studied the documents, his expression growing more serious as he read. "This is way above my pay grade. I'm going to need to contact the district attorney's office and probably the FBI. This much money involved in a legal dispute, it's going to require federal oversight." "FBI?" Isla asked, her eyes wide. "It's okay, sweetheart," Gabe said, putting his arm around his daughter. "They're just making sure everything is handled properly." "You're destroying your family," Vincent said, his voice filled with genuine emotion for the first time. "You have no idea what you're getting into. This treasure has been the subject of legends for decades. Every treasure hunter, every con artist, every desperate person in the country is going to come after you." "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Gabe replied. "Right now, we're focused on honoring Edmund's wishes and using this treasure the way he intended." The sergeant's radio crackled to life, and he stepped aside to take the call. When he returned, his expression was grim. "The feds are sending a team to secure the site," he announced. "Nobody touches anything until they arrive. This whole area is now a crime scene." "Crime scene?" Matteo asked. "Figure of speech," the sergeant clarified. "But with this much money involved, we need to make sure everything is documented properly. Mr. Trinidad, Cross, you're both going to need lawyers. Good ones." As they waited for the federal agents to arrive, Gabe looked around the vault one final time. The treasure that had seemed like a dream just hours before now felt like a tremendous responsibility. Edmund Hartwell had trusted them with his legacy, and they were about to discover whether they were strong enough to handle it. "Dad," Isla said quietly, "are you scared?" "A little," Gabe admitted, "but I'm more excited than scared. We're about to find out what we're really made of." Outside, the sound of additional vehicles arrived, federal agents, more media, and curious onlookers drawn by the growing commotion. The story of the treasure discovery was about to become public, and their quiet life in Millbrook was about to change forever. But in the depths of Edmund Hartwell's vault, surrounded by the wealth of a visionary who had trusted them with his most precious gift, the Trinidad family stood together, ready to face whatever came next. Hartwell's final letter lay open on the... 6 months had passed since the discovery of Edmund Hartwell's treasure, and the restored family portrait now hung in the mansion's main hall, beautifully framed and illuminated by the same chandelier that had revealed the master vault. But this portrait was different from the faded photograph they had found on that first day. This one showed the Trinidad family, dressed in their finest clothes, standing proudly in front of their restored home. Gabe stood in the doorway of what had once been a decrepit library, now transformed into a bright, welcoming space filled with new books, comfortable reading chairs, and the gentle hum of scholars and students pursuing their research. The Hartwell Foundation, established with Edmund's treasure, had become everything he had hoped it would be: catalyst for education, opportunity, and community growth. "Dad, the Hartford Courant wants to interview you again," Isla called from the mansion's front desk, where she had been helping visitors sign up for the afternoon tour. At 12, she had become the Foundation's unofficial ambassador, her natural warmth and enthusiasm making her a favorite among the thousands of visitors who came to see the mansion and learn about Edmund's story. "Tell them I'll talk to them after the school group leaves," Gabe replied, checking his watch. The restored mansion now served as a museum, educational center, and community hub, drawing visitors from across the country who came to see the house that had hidden a treasure for nearly a century. Mateo emerged from the basement, where he had been giving a tour to a group of engineering students from the State University. At 17, he had grown into his role as the Foundation's technical coordinator, helping to maintain the mansion's complex mechanical systems and continuing to solve the puzzles that Edmund had left throughout the building. "The kids loved the demonstration of the vault mechanism," he reported. "3 of them are already talking about changing their majors to mechanical engineering." "Edmund would be proud," Gabe said, smiling at his son's enthusiasm. That's exactly what he hoped would happen. The legal battles had been resolved more quickly than anyone had expected. Edmund's trust documents had been ironclad, designed by a man who had anticipated every possible challenge to his posthumous instructions. Vincent Cross's claim had been dismissed, and the state's attempt to seize the treasure had been overturned by a federal judge who ruled that Edmund's puzzle constituted a valid legal test of worthiness. But the real victory hadn't been in the courtroom, it had been in the months that followed, as the Trinidad family learned to handle the enormous responsibility that came with their newfound wealth. They had honored Edmund's wishes, using the treasure to create something lasting and beneficial for their community. The Hartwell Foundation had established scholarship programs for local students, funded small business loans for entrepreneurs, and provided grants for community improvement projects. The mansion itself had been transformed into a center for learning and culture, hosting concerts, lectures, and educational programs that drew visitors from around the world. "Mr. Trinidad," a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Sarah, his ex-wife, stood in the doorway with an expression that mixed pride with something that might have been regret. "I wanted to thank you again for including the kids in the Foundation's work. Isla and Mateo are thriving." "They're the reason we're here," Gabe replied. "Edmund's treasure was never just about money, it was about creating opportunities for the next generation." Sarah nodded, her eyes taking in the restored mansion's beauty. "I owe you an apology. When you first inherited this place, I thought you were being irresponsible. I was wrong." "You were trying to protect the children," Gabe said gently. "That's what good parents do." "What good parents do is believe in their children's potential," Sarah corrected, "and believe in each other's ability to rise to meet challenges. You did that. I didn't." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Chen, who had become the Foundation's chief historian and archivist. She carried a thick folder of documents and wore the satisfied expression of someone who had made an important discovery. "I found something you need to see," she announced, spreading papers across the library's central table. "I've been researching other wealthy families from Edmund's era, looking for similar treasure hunts or hidden legacies." "Did you find any?" Isla asked, joining them with the curiosity that had made her such an effective puzzle solver. "3 so far," Mrs. Chen replied. "All of them from the same time period, all of them involving puzzles and challenges designed to test the worthiness of potential heirs. It appears Edmund, was part of a larger movement among wealthy individuals who wanted to ensure their fortunes would be used responsibly. A movement? Gabe asked. They called themselves the Stewardship Society, Mrs. Chen explained. Wealthy industrialists and entrepreneurs who believed that great fortunes came with great responsibilities. They created elaborate systems to ensure their money would go to people who would use it to benefit society. Are any of the other treasures still hidden? Mateo asked, his puzzle-solving instincts engaged. That's what I'm trying to find out, Mrs. Chen said with a smile. I thought the foundation might be interested in helping other families discover their own Edmund Hartwell moments. As the afternoon wore on, the mansion filled with its usual mix of visitors, students, and community members. The building that had once been a symbol of abandonment and decay had become a beacon of hope and opportunity. The treasure hunt that had begun with family mockery had evolved into something far greater, a legacy that would benefit generations to come. That evening, as the last visitors departed and the mansion settled into its peaceful nighttime routine, Gabe stood once again in the main hall, looking up at the family portrait. The faces in the photograph showed the quiet confidence of people who had found their purpose and were using their gifts to make the world a better place. Dad? Isla appeared beside him, her notebook tucked under her arm. I've been thinking about what Mrs. Chen said, about the other hidden treasures. What about them? Maybe that's our next adventure. Maybe we're supposed to help other families discover what Edmund discovered, that the real treasure isn't the money, but the opportunity to use it wisely. Gabe smiled, remembering the scared, struggling man who had first stood in this hall 6 months ago. That man had been looking for a way to save his family from financial ruin. What he had found instead was a way to save his family from something far worse, the small, limited life that comes from believing you're not capable of something great. You know what, sweetheart, he said, putting his arm around his daughter. I think that's exactly what we're supposed to do. Outside, the lights of Millbrook twinkled in the darkness, and the town that had once pitied the substitute teacher with the crumbling mansion now looked up to the family who had transformed a burden into a blessing. The treasure hunt was over, but the real adventure, the adventure of using their gifts to help others, was just beginning. And in the hidden depths of the mansion, Edmund Hartwell's final chamber waited silently, its secrets safe in the hands of the people who had proven themselves worthy of the responsibility. The mansion that had once stood as a monument to abandonment now stood as a testament to what was possible when people chose courage over comfort, hope over fear, and service over selfishness. The treasure had been found, but the real wealth, the wealth of purpose, family, and community would last forever.